Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our third day. This is our final session of the first session of the Prison Education Program Subcommittee. We have a full agenda today, so I want to dive right in. But first, I'd like to do just a roll call to make sure that we have the subcommittee, all the members of the subcommittee that are available to participate today at the virtual table. So, Belinda.
Yes, sir, I'm here. Thank you.
Kim.
Good morning.
Stan.
Good morning, everyone.
Dr. McTier. Dr. McTier, will you be able to think? I see you're in attendance. If you're having technical difficulties, looks like he's leaving. He'll work with Valerie LaFour to resolve them. Marissa.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning. And Dr. Paccioni.
I don't see her logged in yet. I will let you know when she does.
Okay, thank you. And Terrell Blunt cannot join us today for the morning or afternoon session. So today, we're going to finish the definition of prison education program other than the best interest piece. And then we have one more disclosure to look at. And so I want to spend about an hour on that. So hopefully by 11, we can transition over into the best interest discussion. And then we'll talk about that for about 2 hours. And then for the final hour of our subcommittee meeting today, I would like to go back through the entire regulation and get those temperature checks that I talked about. We hadn't done them throughout, but I want to just get a temperature check for if there are any outstanding issues that the department should consider when we're preparing amendatory language for the second session for you all to consider. And then the last few minutes before we finish today, we'll talk about the report a little more. I have a little more information to provide you for the report. So Vanessa, with that said, does anybody have any questions before we get started?
Aaron, Dr. McTier signed back in. Can we just check and make sure he has ability to open up his video and microphone? It looks like he may not. Dr. McTier, can you please email Valerie so we can get this fixed?
That would be Valerie LaFour.
Also, we have Stan who would like to ask something.
Yeah, so just in relation to Aaron asking if we had questions opening up, in regards to the report and the reporting out to the full committee and language, is there, we would like to provide, I mentioned to you that I wanted to provide some language, but does that have to be provided by close of day today, or, the full committee won't meet again until the beginning of November? So do we have time to provide some language suggestions even after our session today?
Yes, you do. The report out, we anticipate the report out for the November session will be just a kind of a high level overview of what we discussed. It will not be the committee's final recommendation. It will not be the subcommittee's final recommendation to the main committee. It will just be a high level overview of what transpired during the subcommittee meetings for those main committee members that weren't able to view the subcommittee meetings. That's kind of what we were thinking for the November meeting. So you can still provide us with those recommendations after the meeting today, tomorrow, next week. Just try, the department will be next week really working hard to update the amendatory language based on what we've heard here. So the sooner that you can get us those recommendations, the better.
Sure. And we mentioned the first day about the subcommittee deciding on who might present that report to the full committee. A question about, and I volunteered, and Belinda volunteered to help as well, and we can, maybe make sure the committee is okay with that. But the other question is, if it is Belinda and I, for instance, are one of you from the ed helping out as well, or what will be your role, for instance, Aaron, in that report out to the full committee?
Well, the recommendation is the subcommittee's recommendation to the main committee. Keep in mind, the Department of Education does have a vote on the main committee. So the federal negotiator Jennifer Hong does have a vote on the main committee, but the recommendation is the recommendation of the subcommittee. Of course, the department has provided a general framework of what our thoughts were leading into this. So the subcommittee can take that into consideration, but
and I guess just more specifically, like as we report to the full committee, if there's questions, is it just solely like Belinda and I's responsibility to answer the questions, or will you chime in to answer like questions that may come up about, the subcommittee and its recommendation?
Yes, I can be there I will be there as a technical advisor or technical, to provide any responses on behalf of the department. Jennifer Hong, as the federal negotiator, will also be there to provide answers. And but it is our intention to assist with not only helping to develop the high, if you or Belinda would like help with the high level report for the November session, or of course the report for the actual recommendation for the main committee in December, the department is ready to assist in any way. As I mentioned before, we've seen 45-page reports for and mandatory language for the subcommittee recommendation. We've seen PowerPoint presentations in the mandatory language. We've seen dialogue in the mandatory language, almost like an interview style, dialogue in the mandatory language for the report out. So it's all really, that part you can be creative about. Of course, we have to have the mandatory language for the main committee to consider, but the actual way that you report that is you and Belinda can get creative, and the department will assist in any way. And thank you, Sam. So let's move over to Vanessa. Would you be able to post, to project the mandatory language? We're going to start with paragraph 11 of the definition of a prison education program. Thank you, Vanessa. So here we are mirroring this. Paragraph 11 is about the process for an institution, a post-secondary institution applying to the department for approval of the first prison education program at the first 2 additional locations. So yesterday we talked about what accrediting agency will do, and now today in paragraph 11 we're going to talk about what the actual post-secondary institution will do. So that first paragraph is highlighting that you will have to apply for the first 2 additional locations, the first prison education program at the first 2 additional locations. And there's some cross references in there. I talked a lot about direct assessment yesterday, and we tried to mirror this after the direct assessment program regulations as well. So 600.7, the cross reference is, we've already talked about that. That's the waiver, right? As long as they've applied to the department, but they've applied to the department to be eligible without. Sorry, let me go back. Following the Secretary's initial approval of a prison education program, the additional prison education programs at the same location may be determined to be eligible without further approvals from the Secretary. And so that's just saying that as long as the program is in compliance with 600.7, which is the waiver of the 25% waiver that we talked about, 600.10, that's the requirement that you apply for the first program at the first 2 additional locations. 600.20 C1, that's if you want to add an additional location, you if the school is under provisional certification, or if they're under any cash monitoring, they would have to actually apply to the Secretary before they can add an additional location. So there's some extra requirements around there. And then 600.21 is that they report that subsequent location to the Secretary. So after you've had your first prison education program at your first 2 additional locations approved, as long as you're in compliance with these other cross-reference regulations, you don't have to apply for approval anymore. And then under that, you'll see what the application will entail. I won't read everything. I'll just give you kind of a high level. And so the first thing is, you would apply to the department by describing your educational program. You will provide the documentation of approval by the accrediting agency or the state approval agency. You will provide the name of the correctional facility that the institution is proposing to partner with. Then D is providing the methodology, including any thresholds, benchmarks, standards, data, or metric that the Bureau of Prisons used for the determination. Vanessa, if you can scroll down a little bit. And you'll provide some information on the types of services that you'll be providing to students, including tutoring and counseling and reentry counseling, affirmative acknowledgement that the Secretary can withdraw approval. We'll see that in paragraph 12. We haven't actually looked at that paragraph yet, but under the circumstances under which the Secretary can withdraw approval. And you'll also have to provide affirmative acknowledgement that you agree to submit an annual report as required by the statute every year. So those are the components of the application for the first program at the first 2 additional locations. And then again, after that, you will not have to apply. We'll see. I'll stop there. There is a kind of short attenuated application that will happen after that for subsequent programs, but it's not necessarily application, but we'll talk about that momentarily. I want to pause there for questions.
Sorry, I was on mute. Dr. McTeer?
I was going to say this is on par with what we currently do with getting the accreditation. So I see no issues with this. My only concern is on letter E with the reentry counseling. Let me see. It says the information about the types of services offered to admitted students, including orientation, tutoring, and academic and reentry counseling. So interesting enough, we've kind of ran into an issue about offering reentry services on the inside. So I'm wondering, could this not be a requirement, the reentry counseling component? Because some DOCs will not allow the educational institution to do that. And can we make that an optional if they're able to get approval from their specific facility or whatnot? I just want to make sure that we're not setting up programs that are not equipped to offer reentry solutions or counseling to students.
Stan?
Good morning again, everyone. It's exciting to be here on day 3 with you all. Yeah, I would say, Dr. McTeer, would have 2 perspectives on what you mentioned. I think from the program director perspective, I have heard also that it's challenging to have that component, and as you mentioned, there's a DOC component that I am going to offer a few words on that piece here in a second. But I think I would be a proponent of including this, and maybe a way to think about it is that there should be a partnership with the community organization. You are correct you are correct in I agree with what you say, in that the education institutions aren't really equipped. That's not what they were designed for. That's not what they historically know how to do in terms of providing reentry services. But it should then, fall into the hands of organizations and entities that are, that is their purpose of what they do. For instance, what our program brings to the mix. I think maybe it should be added that there should be an impetus for educational institutions to partner with entities that is their expertise in terms of reentry. But leaving it out is that challenge, so once the person comes home, how do we continue to provide them support to help them continue to continue their education, but also just to do all the other things that they also need to do in order to continue their education. So I think it is a valuable piece to have there, to say that programs need to be thinking about it. Whether they do it themselves is the question that I'm hearing from you. And I agree that, education institutions should not be providing reentry services. A reentry organization should be providing the reentry services.
Belinda.
Yes, thank you for that. I appreciate both my colleagues' comments there. First of all, I just wanted to say that I think that it's great that Ed is making sure that as we're transitioning from, just second chance Pell to Pell for all, that this is going to be the formula that's going to be used to onboard educational institutions. As someone who started a program prior to my role at Vera, Dr. McTeer, I 100% understand what you're saying there. It is a challenge with what has happened with some of the second chance Pell programs and those that aren't in second chance Pell but are servicing students who are currently incarcerated. I do think this is a great opportunity, just as, again, we're having all of these entities come together in ways that we haven't seen before, at least in since 1994, if at all, at ever in this kind of capacity. So while it may indeed be a challenge for an educational institution to think of reentry counseling, I think that this is part of that, as we get to those other parts of this, this statutory language and, amendatory language, that we're trying to show all entities that this is a perfect opportunity to really be thinking about reentry counseling, and both corrections and educational institutions with community partners having a conversation about what that will actually look like. So I have to kind of say that I see myself more in alignment with Stan on this particular thing, because I think and that's what we did at my former institution, was to work with a community partner in this space. And it's been, while I was there, it was so much better because we had that community partner. And I think this is proactive. And I feel like it's a win for the students to make sure that they're getting more voices or more contextual information as they look to re-enter into the community. So I am more of an advocate of keeping that in there. Thank you.
Aaron?
Thank you, Sophia. I also wanted to add to the response to Dr. McTeer. I think under the determination of best interest by the Bureau of Prisons and State Departments of Corrections, there is language in there that states that the Bureau of Prisons is going to determine whether the institution offers relevant academic and career counseling services to participating or confined incarcerated individuals while they're confined or incarcerated in advance of reentry and upon release. And so there is a requirement that these things be also evaluated, by the Bureau of Prisons to ensure that, that these services are being offered to students. So I think that's another reason why we would want to keep that language in there.
Dr. McTeer.
So just to clarify, I'm not saying remove it totally. I do think it needs to be there. And I do think reentry services should be added. My concern is that we're saying that you have to provide these things, especially for those small programs who don't even have the manpower or the resources to even provide the reentry services. I just want to make sure that it's flexible, that I just don't want it to be hardcore. You have to do these things, because again, we're going to set up a lot of programs for failure who can't even provide those reentry services or solutions because of the relationship with the DOC, the location of the state that they're in. So I just want that little bit of flexibility. I don't want to remove it. I do think that there should be partnership with the community. I agree with both of my colleagues in that respect. Just being on this side of the house, I'm running into issues, and I see that many programs are running into issues on trying to provide the educational component and then going and trying to provide the reentry component. And based off, conversations that I've had with the DOC, the reentry more so is aligned with supervision and surveillance. And I just want to be careful about their knowledge and expectation of reentry and the educational knowledge and expectation of reentry. I think it's on two different wavelengths. And those are my concerns.
Aaron?
Thank you. I think we also have, the first part of the paragraph says that under Roman at 2, it says the institution prison education program application must provide information satisfactory to the secretary that includes. So if there is a reason, so we can take it back and discuss it more, but it appears to me that the regulation does provide, as proposed, provide some flexibility if an institution were to apply to the department and say that, you know, the prison, the prison or the local jail or the facility is prohibiting us from providing reentry counseling. Here's some information on why we're not allowed to provide it, but the actual prison is going to provide the reentry counseling. That could be something that the department could consider. But I want to keep moving forward because you know, we only have until 11. So if I see more hands up, but I don't want us to get too caught up on this piece because we do have a lot to get through today.
Stan?
Yeah, I just wanted to, again, advocate for the inclusion of a clause where there is this building of coalition partners to where a community-based partner that does reentry is, you know, as you're putting these requirements here, there could be an additional point that there should be a community-based partner that is involved, that is connected to the delivery, particularly, you know, providing support for reentry. So I think, I mean, that is this idea of providing or creating in the language the need for a coalition or advisory group of stakeholders. And I think, you know, it can serve purpose in this regard to where it is not the educational institution providing the reentry services. It is a community-based organization that has expertise in doing that, who's providing the services. And if it's written that that has to be in there, then, you know, it both, I think there's benefits on both the education that, you know, Dr. McTier, a program such as yours wouldn't have to do it. You would just have to connect with a partner who does do it.
Dave?
Thanks for all those comments, and thanks, Stan, for that last suggestion. I do want to be careful. I want to make sure that everyone understands that this is the part of the regulations where the department is doing a check of how the program was approved by other entities. So if we want to incorporate, Stan, your suggestion here, I think we would need to add a requirement that they submit the documentation that that partnership had done that work and had done the approval, et cetera. So this is our way of just making sure all of those things happened.
And that's what I would be in favor of. Thank you, David.
Aaron?
Okay, so let's move on to the next section. That's Romanet 3. And so if the institution is no longer required to submit an application to the department because it has gotten approval of the first prison education program at the first 2 additional locations, Romanet 3 would be the process by which they kind of submit subsequent applications to the department. So they would submit documentation from the accrediting agency, noting that the institution complies with paragraph 07. I believe 07 is about the initiated adverse action. So there are no initiated adverse actions. If they have an initiated adverse action, they can't start a prison education program, or if they already have prison education programs, they'd have to create that teach-out plan. And they also don't have any final adverse actions. I think we probably should add in there, that's just a note to the department itself, to add in there that they don't have any adverse actions within the last 5 years as required by law. And then they also would have to submit documentation noting that they weren't subject to any actions by the state to revoke the license or authority to operate within the last 5 years either. So essentially an approval by the accrediting agency and approval by the state authorizing agency. And the other piece is obviously of course the department piece, but we would be responsible for making sure there were no emergency actions, suspensions, determinations against the institution in the last 5 years as well. So that's what the department will be looking at And then also, Vanessa, if you can scroll back up just a little bit. I talked about it a little bit more. I talked about it a little earlier, just that where you see under paragraph 11, CFR 600.7, 600.10, 600.20, 600.21, they also have to comply with these sections, the waiver, getting approval if they're under heightened cash monitoring, and also reporting to the department. So you can scroll back down, Vanessa. I'll pause there to chat about that. For the subcommittee to provide comments on it.
I'm not seeing any hands.
What?
Oh, wait, there's
I'm
Stan, I
sorry.
guess.
This is just a tech. What number are we on here?
So it's little Romanet 3. So where Vanessa's highlighted it. So for the second or subsequent prison education program at a location to fulfill the requirements under 600.
What is the full number of the location that we're at?
Oh, 11.
So 11.
Paragraph 11, and then Romanet 3.
Belinda?
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I think that this is excellent guardrails, again, as we're opening this up in unprecedented numbers that we've seen. I do want to mention that I think this is a good moment of pause for educational institutions that want to be in this space, that they are bringing the resources to the table. And, again, encouraging that whole idea of community partners, grants, and things of that nature. This is clearly showing that, while institutions under the experiment, educational institutions might have allowed a professor, for example, to have a pet project of, hey, let's go into the prison space, and an institution has just allowed that one professor to do all the work, that, Ed is making a very strong position here that, experiments or anything else have now finished. We're taking a very formalized approach to this. And, everyone who wants to be at this table needs to understand that there are checks and balances in place. So I just wanted to say that I think that this is great language, which is, definitely serving the students' best interests to make sure that they're protected, because we must make sure that we protect the students. So thank you for adding this language.
Aaron?
Thank you, Belinda. Do we have any other comments on this? Otherwise, we can move forward.
I see no other hands.
Okay, thank you, Sophia. Okay, so the next paragraph is the report to the Department of Education. The statute requires institutions to submit an annual report. It actually requires the department to submit a report to Congress as well. But here we're talking about the report that the institutions will submit to the Department of Education. So we're proposing that we will define the requirements of the report in a Federal Register notice or a Dear Colleague letter, the regulations, the proposal specifically said the Federal Register notice, but some sort of sub-regulatory guidance. So we're proposing not to regulate on each individual component of the report, and that would provide the department flexibility to adjust to any changing data elements that we might need in the future. That would provide the department flexibility in being able to determine different data items or things that we would need in order to provide a comprehensive report to the public and to Congress. So some of the things that will be likely included in the report are examining in-custody outcomes and post-release outcomes, attainment of post-secondary degree or credential, the safety in the law says penal institutions with prison education programs, the size of the waiting list, the extent to which individuals continue their education post-release, employment and earnings outcomes information, rates of recidivism, and extent to which relevant career services are offered to those that participating in the prison education programs. But again, we didn't want to codify all of those things in regulation, because we also, in the Federal Register Notice or the sub-regulatory guidance, want to provide more guidance on how institutions will submit that information to the department. We talked a little bit about verification yesterday, and if any of you have seen our annual verification notice or our annual deadline dates notice, we provide like a lot of information for institutions in there. So we say, well, the student has to submit their, let's say their tax information, but we provide a process how they do it. We provide like information on tax filers versus non-tax filers. And so it just provides us a space to provide information. And if you've seen the notice, it slightly changes every year because we are able to adapt to different changes in IRS systems. And when we get feedback from the community, we're able to make those changes as well. So I will pause there for comment.
Belinda.
I hope I don't sound like a broken record here. I think that this is another really good piece that Ed is putting in here. I like that there's that level of flexibility. As myself and some colleagues had mentioned yesterday, there are some data points that, we may perhaps be a little bit nervous about, like how might that data be used or things of that nature. And I think the idea of just kind of having, a broad like report here without, as Aaron had mentioned, like those statutes of certain things, I think it allows both education, the Department of Ed, but also educational institutions, accreditors, corrections, as we look at how this rolls out, that kind of flexibility. So I just wanted to go on record from the consumer advocacy organization standpoint and say that I think that this is a good idea that we're collecting this data with the report, and then we also have some of that flexibility to see how things move forward. So thank you.
Aaron.
So I wanted to make sure that we had provided an opportunity for for anybody who hasn't had a chance to speak, to if any other subcommittee. I know I don't want to call out any specific subcommittee members, but this is something, the report is something that the institution would submit. So if anybody who has background at a post-secondary institution or wanted to provide, comments on that, that would be welcomed by the department.
I don't see. Oh, Dave.
This is not in response to Aaron's question, but I did want to give a little bit of context for the group about what we might collect at the department, mostly because as you guys saw when we went through the statutory provisions earlier, there are a host of things that Congress asked the department to collect and include in an annual report about prison education programs. Many of those things the department will have through our own internal administrative data collections, and that's things like the amount of Pell Grant funds received in a prison education program, the field that the prison education program is in, which we would use the SIP code, and then for some things in subsequent enrollment, which we've talked about in another case, we'll have that through NSLDS. So there's what we would require schools to report for this purpose would be anything other than those administrative data items that you guys at the Financial Aid Office are already submitting. So that I just wanted to make that part clear, that we're asking for the things in part to help us do this report that on the areas that we're required to report on, but exactly as Aaron mentioned, in part so that we have the ability to adapt our data collection to the data that's available, the data that's most useful, the data that the field is asking for.
Kim.
I thank you for that. I think this is a good opportunity to stop and for anyone listening in that's with institutions that might not be the Financial Aid Office, to remember that the financial aid programs are a college responsibility. And so bringing through academics, all of the different research offices and things like that are a much necessary collaboration and should work together to collect the data. That doesn't always happen across campuses easily. At ours it does, so very thankful for that. But just an opportunity for institutions to know this is an opportunity moving forward to work collaboratively and to provide information to make this successful.
I see no other hands.
Okay, we can move to, let's see, paragraph 13. So this paragraph gives the secretary the ability to revoke approval of a school to operate a prison education program at a correctional facility. And our authority, we're saying that our authority is that if the institution violated any terms of this section, meaning the definition of a prison education program, so 668.80, or that the information that the institution submitted to the secretary, the accrediting agency, the state approval agency, the state departments of corrections or bureau of prisons, or the other oversight entity was materially inaccurate. And so that just provides the secretary the means to withdraw approval, or to withdraw approval of the institution to participate, to offer a prison education program.
Belinda?
Great, thank you. I don't have any problems with how this language is written. I think it's crystal clear. I just wanted to ask a clarifying question. So if indeed that situation happens, does the department then go back to that policy of like the teach out plan to kind of make sure that, like, you know, if Ed does indeed need to come in, again, thinking of the students, so that if an institution, you know, does get that approval revoked, that there will be some kind of teach out plan or something in place just to make sure that the students are protected. I just wanted to make sure. Otherwise, I'm very happy with the language.
Aaron?
Vanessa, can you add a comment bubble there to to potentially add language regarding a teach out or wind down process in the event that the secretary withdraws approval of an institution to offer a prison education program?
Can you repeat that, Aaron?
I'm sorry. Vanessa,
Repeat that again.
Oh, say potentially add language regarding teach out and or wind down for when the secretary withdraws approval. And I think that kind of ties a little bit back, Belinda, into the waiver withdrawal. We provided, I believe, an award year after the withdrawal for them to wind down the program. So it does make sense. Withdraw, put a withdraw between the secretary and approves. Yeah, secretary withdraws approval. Yeah. Yep. Thank you, Vanessa. How does that look, Belinda, for a suggestion?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that, you know, we've got it written there so that, again, the students are protected if, you know, if this situation does occur. Thank you.
Okay.
No other hands?
Okay.
Just a moment. I think I just saw Stan's hand go up. Stan?
Yeah, this is more so in relation to wanting to go back and I'm just still grappling with the idea that all of this is just how we are expanding Second Chance Pell. You know, and it's not, this is not Pell for all. This is not creating we're just discussing how we expand Second Chance Pell, and that's essentially what this is. And I would again, so when we think about statutory, what would bar us from saying that in order to be eligible for Pell, that you have to be part of a program offering a prison education program, and then also just adding another requirement of another way that you can be eligible for Pell on the inside. So we still meet the statutory requirement of defining what a prison education program is, but we add a piece that says that Pell can also be attained in some other fashion. And I know this goes back up to some of the definition that we were talking about earlier, but I feel like that is still, something that is on my mind.
Aaron.
Thank you for that, Stan. Vanessa, do you have the statutory language available to project? Thank you, Vanessa. Can you scroll down just a bit? I'll tell you when to stop. Yeah, right there. Can you highlight paragraph 3? It says federal Pell Grant eligibility. So, Stan, this says, notwithstanding subsection A, in order for a confined or incarcerated individual who otherwise meets eligibility requirements, and that section is really just talking about all the other stuff, right? High school diploma, everything, of this title to be eligible to receive a federal Pell Grant under Section 401. That's where the statute authorizes the federal Pell Grant. The individual shall be. We don't really use shall in the regulations anymore. We use must. Shall be enrolled or accepted for enrollment in a prison education program. So if the individual is incarcerated, confined or incarcerated, they would not be eligible for a federal Pell Grant unless the individual enrolled in a prison education program, and that's the statute. That's part of the statute.
So is there a way to? Is there a way to add an and or to that, to where we still hold that to be true, and expand on the eligibility? Where are my lawyers at?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I was gonna call on our general counsel if they wanted to provide a response. The department's general counsel.
Like, I guess the focus is on that shall part. If that is what is, if it's written as shall, how can we work with that to expand eligibility?
Steve?
Yeah, sorry, my system had frozen up and I'd had to reboot a moment ago. But the statute defines what we can work with, right? It sets outer constraints, and we cannot enlarge the prison education program piece bigger than the statute allows us to. So, I mean, this is really, I think of this as Congress coming in with a half step to open the door for these types of programs, and with all these safeguards to see if it works, and hopefully because they'll eventually open the door wider.
Aaron?
Vanessa, thank you for that, Vanessa. Can we go back to the amendatory language? We do have about 15 minutes left. Of course, we can, take some more time to talk about this if the subcommittee feels as though we should stay here. But we want to make sure we get through everything today. So Stan, I appreciate your comments. I hope that, our responses, I hope that you can take our responses back and think through more of.
What was that section number? Vanessa, do you have that pulled up to where you can just say the number?
Just give me 1 second, Stan. It is So essentially it's section 484 of the Higher Education Act. And the paragraph is small t. And then the subparagraph is number 3. So 484 T3.
Okay.
And these are the, and saying specifically, these are the amendments that the 2021 appropriations bill made to the Higher Education Act. So if you start, okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I mean, you know, just to wording wise, you know, Belinda, I know you've been using the wording Pell for All. I think for the public, it would be more accurate to not use that language, as it is not Pell for All.
Linda.
Thank you very much for that, Stan. Sorry, I usually use them interchangeably between Pell reinstatement, which reflects the language. So yes, I will use Pell reinstatement, but again, I'm just using the language from the FAFSA Simplification Act, my friend, and I do understand, you know, that there are statutes here which are blocking this larger expansion. I think I would defer back to the legal counsel that just spoke and said that, you know, I think that there, you know, we do want this open 100%. And yes, I think perhaps me using Pell for All, I probably should just say Pell reinstatement, but
I mean,
I think there is
partial Pell reinstatement and my more accurate viewpoint of it.
Yes, sir.
It is not
Yep.
full Pell reinstatement.
Yep, I understand, my friend. So I'm just defaulting to the language, but thank you very much for that comment. I appreciate it.
Aaron.
Yeah, perhaps moving forward, we can agree to say Pell for confined or incarcerated individuals to enroll in a prison education program. Now that's a lot of language to use, but just so we can be very specific about what we're talking about, I will make an effort to refer to it as Pell for confined or incarcerated individuals to enroll in a prison education program going forward. Let's move into, but thank you for your comment, Stan. Let's move into paragraph P. So we're actually here. We're essentially we can always come back to it, but we have completed our review of the definition of a prison education program. So now we're going to move into paragraph P. So currently, the statute only prohibits those incarcerated in a state or federal facility from accessing Pell. There may be students right now in local jails or juvenile justice facilities accessing Pell and eligible programs. And so we need to provide the students in those programs time to transition and institutions to transition those programs to prison education programs. Or if they unfortunately choose not to transition their programs to a prison education program, we need to provide them time to wind down. This will ensure that students enrolled in these programs are not automatically cut off from aid on July 1st, 2023, when the statute and these regulations, these proposed regulations will go into effect. The July 1st, 2029 date, so we have here, so we have for institutions operating eligible programs in a correctional facility that is not a federal or state penal institution, confined or incarcerated individual who otherwise meets the eligibility requirements to receive Pell and is enrolled in an eligible program. So we're not talking about prison education programs here. We're talking about students right now that are in local jails, juvenile justice facilities, anything other than a federal or state institution, or anything other than an institution that's not participating in Second Chance Pell. And they don't meet the requirements under paragraph O, the definition of prison education program we just talked about. They can continue to receive Pell until July 1st, 2029, or the student reaches the maximum time frame, their own maximum time frame as defined in the Code of Federal Regulations. And that is 150% of the published length of the program. So if it's, let's say it's a 4-year program, that's 6 years, or if it's a 2-year program, that might be 3 years. or the student has exhausted their Pell eligibility. And we talked about that quite a bit, about eligibility used, and we talked about like how Pell is not unlimited. There are limits to Pell, 600% lifetime eligibility used, or 6 scheduled awards. And so the rationale behind the July 2029 date is that going back to that maximum time frame for a typical full-time bachelor's degree program, that would be a maximum of 6 years. So we wanted to provide 6 years after July 1st, 2023. We also say in paragraph number 2 that the institution would not be permitted to enroll a confined or incarcerated individual in an eligible program unless, additional students they wouldn't be permitted to enroll additional students after July 1st, 2023, unless the institution converted the program to a eligible prison education program as defined in paragraph O. And this would ensure that institutions do not continue to enroll students after July 1st, 2023. So I'll pause there.
Stan.
Yeah, this touches right on, what I was just mentioning. I mean, not only is this not Pell for all, but we're proposing to remove Pell eligibility for folks that actually have it right now. I mean, I'm very much, to me, that's what it reads as. So people in jails now that are able to get Pell under the current, under the law that was in place before this was passed, will now not be able to do that after July 1st, 2029. Am I reading that correctly?
That is correct. That is what the law says. If the student, as of July 1st, 2023, students.
What is the thinking behind that?
The statute states that as of July 1st, 2023, a student to access Pell must enroll in a prison education program. What we're doing here is we are ensuring that students that are enrolled in local jails or juvenile justice facilities continue to be able to access Pell, because as of July 1st, 2023, they will lose, the student would have lost eligibility without this regulatory language. So if a student is enrolled in an eligible program that is not a prison education program, they will still be able to continue. Dan, if I can finish, Dan, they will still be able to continue receiving Pell through July 1st, 2029. So if you enroll a student right now, and if a student is in a local jail and they are in an eligible program and they enroll right now, they will be able to receive Pell all the way until July 1st, 2029. Or if the student has been receiving Pell, then if they bumped up against their lifetime eligibility used, then the statute says they can't receive Pell after that. Also, each student has a maximum time frame for how long they can receive Title IV aid for a program. And so if they bump up against that, then they would no longer be able to receive Pell either. But those are all statutory requirements. So this expands, this provision absolutely expands eligibility to ensure that students in these situations continue to receive Pell. And I think Sophia, I apologize. I think we'll let Stan respond, but then we have Steve Finley, right, that wants to add.
And also Dave. Dave
Okay.
wants to listen.
So, I mean, this is again would point to a lack of understanding the carceral system when putting this type of wording in place. People in jails and juvenile facilities are most people don't spend, they're not supposed to spend more than a year. Oftentimes they do illegally, and often in some cases, but even when it's done illegally, it's not done. Most people are not in those institutions for more than a year to 2 years, maybe a little bit more than that. So to think about someone who is using Pell right now, they're going to be long out of their institution that they were in by 2029. So they're no longer, that number of people is small. And this is actually restricting, this is now the other challenge that is brought in many of my program folks that run prison education programs can attest to this. Most prison education programs don't want to go inside of a jail because they know that the population inside jails only are there for less than a year. So they can't really offer a prison education program with them because they're going to be being sent back into the community. So what makes most sense for those people is just to access regular Pell, and potentially, they may be in jail for a couple of months. They may be able to, either continue because they were already in college when they got incarcerated. So they are somehow maybe attempting to continue their education through an online course or through a correspondence course. But they don't have access to a prison education program because most providers don't want to, because of the time limit, aren't providing that inside of jails.
Steve?
Steve, you're
you might
muted.
be on mute.
Thank you. I was just saying I appreciate Stan's concerns. I mean, we're limited by what we can do within the statute. The provisions that talk about trying to maintain access for as long as possible under the statute are just designed to make sure that anyone that is getting those benefits, if they remain incarcerated, will continue to do so pretty much for as long as we can define them within the limits of the statute. And I'll turn this over to David now.
Dave?
Steve and Aaron have effectively covered what I had to say. These provisions were intended to provide as long I guess you would call it a runway as we possibly could, given the statutory restraints that we're under, to ensure that individuals who are currently in these programs or who start one of these programs prior to July 1st, 2023, don't suffer those consequences based on what the law provides. But we don't have a whole lot of flexibility beyond that, given what we were handed by Congress.
Belinda? Okay, back to Stan then.
I slightly disagree with that, because didn't we in this meeting define what a correctional institution is, which we added jail to it? So maybe we don't add jail to the definition of a correctional institution. So we are not bound by the statutory limit because we are deciding what a correctional institution is in the language. If we didn't add jail, then they would still be eligible.
Aaron?
Let's go to Belinda. I think she's been waiting.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. I just wanted to interject two small things. Wearing my previous hat as a prison education director at my institution, we were in the process of doing some programming with jails, and for what we were doing, those people had not yet been given a sentence yet. So we were working with using traditional Pell monies for those students anyway. So this particular data that's listed here for the program that I had started wouldn't actually be adversely impacting them, because we were using traditional Pell funds for those people because they hadn't yet been sentenced. Another thing I would just say, this language from my other hat that I'm wearing, with Vera representing, we're not representing, providing technical assistance for the Second Chance Pell institutions in this space. If this data here isn't listed with this July 1st of 2029, the former program that I ran at Claflin would end before this period, because we were part of second round of Second Chance Pell, and if we didn't go through these other things, those students would be caught out. So from that perspective of Second Chance Pell, and consumer advocacy groups, this actual additional runway, I think from our perspective as we're seeing this, is actually very beneficial for the students, because it's giving a wider window. So I'll just add that from my 2 cents there. Thank you.
Dave?
I think, Aaron, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just
first?
wanted to respond to Stan's last question. He asked, can we remove jail from the definition of a confined or incarcerated individual? And going back to the reference that I gave earlier, the 44 subpart, Section 44 of the Higher Education Act, Congress defines a confined or incarcerated individual as means an individual who is serving a criminal sentence in a federal, state, or local penal institution, prison, jail, reformatory work farm, or other criminal or other similar correctional institution. So the statute, based on the statutory language, we would not be able to remove jail from the definition.
Would you rather go to Dave or Stan, Aaron?
Let's go to Dave because I think he had his hand up next.
Okay.
And this doesn't change anything about Stan's remarks or anything else that's been said. But this is a follow-on point to what Belinda mentioned, which is that the prohibition on Pell eligibility applies when an individual is incarcerated in a federal or state penal institution. But individuals aren't even considered incarcerated, meaning they're eligible for all types of aid if they're not serving a criminal sentence. And the number of programs where individuals are serving a criminal sentence in local jails and institutions are offering programs in those spaces is quite small, according to FSA's data. We do collect data from institutions identifying who is incarcerated, and it's a small population. It's still certainly important, and it's part of why we want to address it here. But most students who are in local jails typically have not yet been sentenced, and therefore are fully eligible for Title IV aid if they otherwise meet the requirements.
So
Stan.
I think that's my point, is that we don't want to take that away from them. Aaron, the definition that you read, there are people in jails that have been sentenced and that are serving a sentence, an incarcerated sentence. Then there are people in jail that have not been sentenced and they are not serving. And those individuals, as David just mentioned, had been eligible for Pell. To my understanding, the way that things are changing, we are now taking that away from them. We're now saying that if you're in a jail, you have to be in a prison education program. Whereas before, David, as you just mentioned, if you were in a jail, you weren't sentenced yet, you can access Pell just like any other person who doesn't have a criminal, who's not confined.
Dave.
So I want to actually defer this to OGC, but my understanding, based on our earlier discussion in the amendatory text that we were looking at for the definition of a confined or incarcerated individual, actually stated that they were serving a criminal sentence. And so if that factor doesn't apply, I don't believe that they would be considered ineligible for any kind of Title IV aid. They would be fully eligible.
Then that clarifies what, okay, thank you. So those individuals not sentenced will still be, as they were before, able to access Pell under the current language that we have.
Steve?
Yeah, we'll go back and take a look at that and confirm that that's the case. And at the risk of stating the obvious, someone who is incarcerated only has as much access to use that Pell as they are given within the limits of their being confined.
I mean, there's online courses and correspondence courses, and if the person was currently in school, they can continue using that despite being small, as you said, David, small or not. Really, the reason that it's so small is because there's not enough advocacy around letting, we work inside jails, and when we tell people that they're eligible, they're like, what? That's not what the word on the yard is. I'm a convict, I can't access that. So there's not enough education and knowledge is why that number is so small. It's not because the number of people who wish and would want to use that is low. It's because they don't have the knowledge of that, they can use it.
I see no other hands.
I just wanted to move us down quickly, Vanessa, to one more disclosure that we didn't talk about yesterday. There you go, 668.43. And so I failed to talk about the disclosure yesterday related to the prohibition on any prohibitions on licensure employment. So so we're looking at 6 Romanet 2. So we're saying an institution that offers an eligible prison education program as defined in 668.8, if applicable, must make available information upon request that confirms that the education is designed to lead to licensure or employment for a specific job or occupation, and does not typically involve federal prohibitions on the licensure employment of the formerly incarcerated individual, and in the state in which the correctional facility is located, or in the case of a federal correctional facility in the state in which the individual is confined or incarcerated in such facility plans to reside upon release. So that's just another disclosure that we wanted to provide upon request from the student, that confirms that if they enroll in the program, that there's no prohibitions on licensure employment if they take that program. There's no state or federal prohibitions on licensure employment if they take that program, if they enroll in the program. And again, here we use the from our discussion yesterday, we used the for the federal correctional facility because we wanted to make sure that the student could request information about the specific state that they plan to return to, and not just the state that most students will return to. So for instance, if I'm in a federal correctional facility and I want to return to Maine again, but they determined that most students will return to New York, I can request information about Maine and any prohibitions on licensure or employment there.
I see no hands.
All right, so let's move into the best interest conversation. So we'll go back to the best interest conversation. So Vanessa, if you can pull up the chart that I sent you. I sent the chart to all the negotiators this morning. Can I get a thumbs up if you all received it this morning? I think Kim, Stan, do you have it? It's also projected here. Thank you. All right. So we've discussed continuing education. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think we talked about job placement. Yes, we talked about job placement and earnings. And so we wanted to move to recidivism and then completion to round out the discussion. And we reserved quite some time to talk about this. If the conversation ends early, then we can definitely go back through the entire regulation and do our temperature checks. But so for recidivism, the rate of well, before I start, does anybody have any questions? Any kind of transitioned abruptly?
I see no hands.
All
Wait,
right.
sorry, hold on, Dr. McTier.
So just the document that you're showing on the screen and the document that we have, these are the metrics in which the Department of Education is going to be collecting. That's my understanding.
So yeah, so these are the indicators that the Bureau of Prisons will be using to determine whether the program is in the best interest of students. And what we're doing here at the subcommittee is defining the subcommittee members will be defining, will help the department in ways that we can define these to provide the Bureau of Prisons and State Departments of Corrections with guidelines, guidance, assistance with making those determinations. And what we've heard throughout and you all correct me if I'm wrong, but what we've heard from members is that the Bureau of Prisons does not have the capacity to do these things. And so the department, we've heard support for the department's position that these will be defined because the department does have the authority to define them, but we've heard support for that position. And we've also heard, my understanding is that we've heard support that the department will use its own data sources, specifically for earnings and continuing education rate, in order to for the potential metrics and the potential cohorts. So that's what we've heard. I know there was a little discussion on, the institution's role in the job placement rate, but I think if there's more conversation about continuing education, post-release or earnings, we can have that. But I think it would be beneficial to move to recidivism and completion, so we can make sure we have a conversation about those. I'll pause there.
Dr. Mateer.
Okay, so it's you're saying the Bureau of Prisons is going to actually be collecting this information, not the Department of Ed.
No, the department. So we'll use our system.
So Bureau of Prisons, so I'm confused.
I'm sorry. For continuing education, we talked about using our national student loan data system to collect that information. And then for earnings, we talked about using college scorecard information to collect that information. So the department would be the potential. You see the box 4, the potential data source. The department would be the data source for earnings and
Okay, I hear you. I just wanted to be clear because you said the Bureau of Prisons will collect, so I was a little bit confused. I will add this, and then I'll yield my time. The only concern that I have is that we do not actually have a representative from the DOC here to discuss. So basically, we're saying that they can't do these things, but it would have been really, really nice to, as much as it pains me to say this, to have them at the table to really discuss their capacity on what they can and cannot do, and then just that building that potential partnership. I feel like we're missing that component in this subcommittee, and yeah.
Stan.
Yes, I was just going to echo the same thing. I think a lot of the language has said that the DOC is going to do X, Y, or Z. And we have, I've mentioned it a couple times, and I really wasn't directing it at Marissa, because Marissa is really a partner within the DOC system. But, to have, for instance, I believe the organization name is called ASCA, the Association of State Correctional. That was their old name. They have a new name now, but I do know the director of that, for instance, is Ann Precythe, who is the director of DOC in your state, Terrence, Dr. Mateer in Missouri. But she also is the one that is oversees, is the president of this collective of correctional leaders. I think having them at the table is missing. And being a member on the full committee, I would actually, I'm interested in proposing to the full committee when we get back that we add this DOC member to our committee, as a full voting member has that ability to do that, to my understanding. So that is something that I will be bringing back to the full committee. But as Dr. Mateer mentioned, we're missing that voice, and we're having them do a lot, and they're not really at the table.
Aaron?
Stan, I think I mentioned in the email that I sent to the subcommittee that we won't be adding members to the subcommittee, but if there is with the full support of the subcommittee, we can invite individuals to speak to the subcommittee, address the subcommittee. Oh, I'm sorry. It sounds like you said you wanted to add to the full committee. I apologize.
Stan?
I was just going to make the correction that it was bringing that to the full committee. And to my understanding, the
that was
full
my-
committee, you know, we had that conversation in the full committee of bringing on a new negotiator. And it, you know, we have according to the protocol, the ability to do that. And so I'm just mentioning that I will be bringing that to the full committee in our November meeting, because I do think it's, you know, we're missing out on that in this particular conversation. I mean, a lot of the things that we've been saying, I believe, you know, we know because we, you know, Dr. McTier and other partners work with the DOC. We are very capable, but it would be great to have them particularly mention their perspectives on it.
Aaron.
Thank you for that clarification, Stan. That was my mistake. I gotta I thought you were referring to the subcommittee, so I apologize for that. So what I'd like to do is move into recidivism and talk a little bit about that and get the subcommittee's thoughts. The statutory language requires that the Bureau of Prisons and State Departments of Corrections take into account the recidivism rate when determining if the programs are in the best interest of students. And a potential metric for that would be the percentage of formerly incarcerated individuals who are reincarcerated within a certain number of years. Some of the data sources the department were thinking about were under WIOA, states report on their rates of recidivism. And we do acknowledge there that data may vary from state to state. There is some information from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and there's also some information from the U.S. Sentencing Commission that also researches recidivism for the federal system. And then we'll be looking at potential cohorts. The department would seek to include only students who will be released, and that may require additional reporting. I'll pause there.
Dr. McTier.
You know, I understand this is statutory, so note that I know that. But I got to go on record and say that collecting recidivism rates has nothing to do with education and should not be used as a metric for understanding and/or trying to get a glimpse of whether or not a higher education and prison program is doing their job or doing the right thing or providing that quality education. We cannot control what happens once a person leaves a facility. A higher education institution can't do that. And then trying to track recidivism rates when we know that, you know, people are their probation or parole is revoked, not for new crimes, but just for technicalities and just other areas. This is not the right metric to be collecting. It has nothing to do with education. And I want to go on record saying that I'm not in support of having a recidivism rate metric a part of any part of the educational component.
Stan.
Yes, I would concur with Dr. McTier that, you know, in terms of evaluating quality of a program, I think I had given a example earlier of how recidivism rate doesn't quite touch on quality of a program. I was going to ask about, is there a way to maybe color code or some the data source? So to say like, so we can see which ones are being the data sources, the Department of Ed, which ones is the Department of Corrections, which ones is the educational institution that's responsible for getting that data?
We can try and work on that after lunch. I don't want to put.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay.
Because, and then just to also like, which ones are the DOC required and which ones are the educational institution? Like, which one are you leaning on the DOC to get? Which one are you leaning on the educational institution to get or provide?
Well, we would like your feedback on that. So what we heard in our initial discussions were that the Department of Education, for at least for the earnings and continuing education, it sounded like the subcommittee was in general agreement that the Department of Education will be the data source for those two indicators. Job placement, you see there, we say the Department of Education can also use college scorecard information, so the department can do that. We also got information from the subcommittee that the institution may play a role in that. These are all proposals. We're gonna go back and work on a mandatory language for you for that section of the regulation to provide to you before the second subcommittee meeting. And so so these are not concrete. These are it's all a proposal. And it's really all a proposal, Stan, and honestly, until the main committee votes on it. And
Dr. McTeer.
So just a point of clarification and something to consider. What does the department consider as recidivism? And then what will be collected with that understanding? What is the time frame after release that the department will be collecting that information? So is it going to be, once the person is released, is it going to be the first 3 months, 6 months, a year? Is it going to be every time that that individual returns back to a confined facility? I think there needs to be a level of clarity here. Again, just pointing back to my other note, I don't think this is a good metric, but I think having this information, yeah, is needed.
Aaron, did you want to clarify, or should we go to David?
let's go to David first, and then I'll.
Okay. Dave?
Okay, sure. Just a clarification, about who would be responsible for providing data that would enable us to calculate these rates. I think, as Aaron mentioned, what we've talked about so far is that the department would be in large part responsible for providing the data for the continuing education rate, the earnings rate, and the completion rate. But there's a caveat, and that is the row number 5 on the potential cohort exclusions. We don't have data on individuals who are released. So if we want to exclude those individuals from any of from either the continuing education or the earnings, we would need to get that information either directly from correctional agencies or the penal institutions, or through the schools, who would have to obtain it from, I believe, the penal institutions themselves.
Aaron?
Yeah, and just to follow up on Dr. McTeer's question about the time frame, what is recidivism? I think that we wanted to get the subcommittee's ideas on parameters to put around there, and that's the purpose of allotting 2 hours for the discussion today, to get your feedback on what the time frame should be. If you have a definition that we should be including for recidivism, or in the potential cohort exclusions, what students to exclude. I think that's the whole point of the discussion, is to get your expertise and feedback on how the department can draft the mandatory language for you all for the next session.
Can I interject really quick just to answer that point, or to provide clarity? Is that okay?
Sure.
So, but I think what would also be helpful is to hear what the department considers as recidivism, because you all propose this, so I at least want to know where your thoughts are at, and so that way we can kind of work through that point, instead of just going in based off our opinions. We at least want to see where you all's heads are at with this metric.
Aaron, did you want to respond, or should we move to Belinda?
Let's go to Stanley and Belinda. I think they've been waiting, and
Okay, let's go Belinda next, and then Stan.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, recidivism rates is something that we're definitely in the field trying to get away from. I understand it's statutory, so we've obviously got to deal with it in some capacity. And I appreciate the opportunity for us to try to help guide how this actually happens. I would be very interested. I know, obviously, continuing this conversation today, but also I'd be interested to see some other ways that Ed might want to reach out to other, community groups or organizations that do, reports in this space, to kind of see ways that this data, though unfortunate that we need it because it's statutory, is not invasive towards the people that we're trying to, to serve in this space. So, one of the things that, I definitely want to make sure that we're not seeing is, for example, it's an awful example, but I think it highlights the potential issues here, is, a student finishing up with a program and then the alumni association having to, track and, ask like, hey, where's your address? And, that kind of situation. And if we don't take proper put in place proper guardrails, this really could be very hurtful, to the students that we're trying to serve. So I definitely would like to see how we can, I think the use of existing data points so that it's not as invasive and, people know that they're, constantly being looked over, over their shoulder as to, hey, people are waiting to see, if I recidivate. But I think the idea of there's a lot of good, community partners that are, publishing reports in this space and using data. And I would like to see how Ed will kind of move forward with this for conversations as we get ready to figure out how this data will 100% be tracked.
Stan.
So I wanted to ask for clarification and then also, propose a thought. So clarification question, these are the metrics that will be used to determine if a prison education program is able to continue offering to offer a prison education program, correct? Or could you clarify what the use of this is?
Can we, Vanessa, can you project the mandatory language? And can you scroll down to the definite, let's see, yep, 668, and then scroll down a little more. Scroll down a little more. So 3I, yep, that's perfect. So we say here, after 2 years of approval under paragraph 2, that's, remember, from our discussion, paragraph 2 was that initial time frame, because we know that institutions and Bureau of Prisons won't have data, so we're giving them 2 years. Now the schools, the program still have to be approved by the Bureau of Prisons, but they won't have to be approved under these standards. So after 2 years of approval under paragraph 2, has been determined by the Bureau of Prisons, appropriate state departments of corrections, or other entity that is responsible for overseeing correctional facilities to be operating in the best interest of students. An oversight entity's determination that a prison education program is operating in the best interest of the student is based on all of the following. And so that's the Bureau, the BOP and DOC will base their determination on these indicators. And what we're going to do here is define the indicators to provide the Bureau of Prisons.
Okay. So the program has started offering college and prison, and it's now been 2 years, and these metrics need to be provided to assure that they continue. Is that a correct summation of it?
Correct.
And so, and I'm sorry to be rehashing this, so that what is the process to even first let them in to the prison? Just the DOC approving that they can come in and offer college and prison?
A prison education program, correct. For the first 2 years.
So the DOC is the gatekeeper to decide if a prison education program comes into their correctional facility. And then after 2 years, they have to meet these metrics to continue being a prison education program.
Based on how we define them during the subcommittee.
Okay. And so my proposal is should the Department of Ed be the one that is determining the eligibility of the program? And I mean, it sounds like, again, the DOC is the one that's determining. I guess I'm a little bit mixed up on, I understand that we're trying to figure out the metrics of what a good quality program that is working in the best interest. I'm just wanting clarification on how it's going to be used and who is using it.
Belinda, I'm so sorry. I know you've been waiting. I just wanted to, I know me and Stan are kind of, I'm trying to answer Stan's questions as they come. So Belinda, would you mind if I answered this question and then we will turn it over to you? I do apologize for making you wait.
I think it was actually Kim.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Kim, would you mind if I answer the question and then I can't see Kim on my screen. Does she have a thumbs up? Okay. Well, for Stan, what I heard yesterday was, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but it was pretty clear to me what I heard yesterday was that the Bureau of Prisons and State Department of Corrections could not collect all this information. So that seems to signal to me that the department should be defining the process to provide guidelines on how the Bureau of Prisons makes these determinations. State Departments of Corrections or other correctional authorities are tasked with reviewing and approving individual programs, and this will be a new role for many of them. And to ensure adequate protections for students and a fair and comparable process across states, we believe that it is appropriate for the department to define these terms. And then the DOC, the BOP and DOC will then determine whether the programs meet those definitions. And I think, Sophia, thank you for letting me skip ahead, Kim and Belinda.
Kim and then Belinda.
That's no problem, Erin. Thank you. I think just to follow up from an institution perspective, knowing that DOE will have things in place for us to monitor our progress and if we're doing things correctly, I think to answer Stan, I think this gives the DOC the opportunity to get rid of the institution that's not fulfilling their original promise when they set up that relationship to have the program within their institution. So I think by the time 2 years rolls around, you're going to know if that's a relationship you want to continue for incarcerated individuals at your correctional facility. So I think that's kind of I think it's good. I'm glad to see that we want to make sure that we're fulfilling our role in what we've promised to do. And these metrics, I think, will have a good role in that. Thank you.
Belinda? And then Stan.
Thank you, Aaron. To get back to your question earlier about the time frame, if we have to indeed, collate data on recidivism, I think we would like to see a very long runway given. I do not have carceral experience myself, but I've worked and have friends who have carceral experience, and that transition back takes time. It takes time for the individual, the community, and things of that nature. So if we do indeed have to count some data, I think it would be in our best interests to give individuals, their families and communities time to, get back, readjust, get immersed back to the community and things of that nature. So I would like to kind of put out there perhaps something like a 5 to 7 year kind of time frame here again, before we actually start, checking to see, if someone has indeed, recidivated. so that, you know, again, we're giving that time. I think doing smaller integrals of, you know, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, whatever that case might be, I think that I'm not sure that that's very positive. I don't think that collating this data in of itself is positive anyways, but I like the idea of that longer runway so that, you know, people have a chance to readjust, and, you know, hopefully again with these wraparound services, the community and things like that, I think if we do indeed have to capture that snapshot, that it would be, you know, it would definitely be more advantageous if that longer runway there. And then also, I think it might be interesting to potentially kind of define how we're actually going. And that's another point that you'd said about, you know, what is the definition that we're going to put in here? You know, is it going to be a new felony? Is it a return to prison? You know, Dr. McTeer had mentioned, you know, sometimes people might be out on probation, and, you know, something happens that for whatever reason, unfortunately, gets them back into the system. I think it would be more fair in capturing this data that we're a little uncomfortable with, that we really define what that definition is, because I think something like a new felony is very much different than if someone, you know, is out on probation and, you know, an unfortunate situation happens and, I don't know, something trivial, and unfortunately that person is back. So I think it's really important for us to, you know, take the time. I welcome my colleagues on the subcommittee for us to kind of think about how we define that to make it really as fair as possible for all parties in this. Thank you.
Stan.
Yes, and thank you, Kim, for the clarifying point that you made, and thank you, Aaron, as well, for helping clarify the question that I had. And I guess partly what I was coming to is that proposing this idea of the department is the one that assures prison education program is meeting quality metrics. And in a way, the way that I was envisioning it, there can be, in a sense, a pool of PEP programs that a DOC can go around and know that they have a list of approved quality programs. And any given DOC can say, I like this, let's bring 5 of them to my institution in some manner. So I guess I was just, but in order to get to that indication of being a quality program, I understand that they need to be offering prison education. So they would need to have already been partnered with the institution. Just trying to wrap my head around all of that and doing that out loud. But thank you for the clarifications. And I'll point to what Belinda just mentioned. The 2-year expectation seems pretty short. I think to gather some of these metrics after 2 years will be challenging. I would be in favor of what Belinda just mentioned in terms of having more time, maybe doing a halfway point at 2 years, but then, you know, having it be longer than 2 years for like a final determination.
Aaron.
Thank you for all the comments. I did say I would circle back to Dr. McTeer's question, what is recidivism? I think, you know, that's, I'm going to repeat myself, but I think that's what we're all here to discuss, to figure out. I believe that, you know, we've tried to assemble a subcommittee of experts to provide us with more information. And I heard Belinda say, you know, consider new felonies or a return to prison, or, and Dr. McTeer, you mentioned if probation is revoked. So those are things that can be added, that can be considered in the definition. But I do think that the reason that there wasn't a regulatory framework that was presented to you is because we wanted to hear from you all what the most accurate definition could be, what the cohort could be, what the data source could be. So I see Dr. McTeer's hand raised, and I'm not taking Sophia's job, but after Dr. McTeer's comments, I would like to move to completion rate so we can talk about that before lunch, because we have to come back and talk about three more indicators, the inputs, after lunch, and then not stop the conversation, but I hope that conversation we could wrap that conversation up in an hour, so then we could go back to do the temperature checks for the last hour for the entire proposed regulation.
Dr. McTier.
I'm just really concerned that the department is not willing to tell us what their thought process was for, and or the definition was for this whole metrics that they've created. I feel like you all are trying to utilize us as a scapegoat to put into place something that you've already created, and I think that's unfair. So I still want to know what the department's thought process was. What was their definition when creating these metrics? It can't just be put off on us, and it just can't be, because I don't agree with utilizing this as a metric. So I really want to hear what the department stance is, and I feel like you all are not willing to tell us, and you all are trying to hop over my request. I don't think that's fair.
Aaron?
Dr. McTier, I hear your concerns, and we sent out the proposal. And you had mentioned earlier as well that this is defined, going back to the definition that Congress amended, the Congress put into the 2021 appropriations bill that amended the Higher Education Act. Rates of recidivism for such individuals is in the actual statutory text. We did not provide regulatory language here. We provided a lot of mandatory language in this document. There's a lot of red line, and you can see that we didn't provide the mandatory language here because we wanted to hear your feedback. We are not trying to trap anybody. We are not trying to hold anything back. There is no mandatory language right now for the indicators. There's none. And we've assembled you all to provide us feedback. If you don't like what's proposed here, we do really want to hear what your thoughts are. Or you can submit it. You can submit that information if you want. You've gone on record to say that several subcommittee members have gone on record publicly to say that they don't think that recidivism is a good indicator to determine if a program is in the best interest of students. The department will take everything you said back and consider everything you said. But there is no we're not withholding anything because we didn't provide any regulatory framework. I really would like to. I know that may not allow your concerns, but I would like to move to completion rate to have a small discussion on that. Belinda, Sophia.
Belinda's changed her mind.
Thank you. Vanessa, can we repost the chart, please? Thank you very much, Vanessa. All right, so the department completion rate does not appear in the statute, but the department is proposing to add a completion rate. So a potential measure would be the percentage of students who complete their program within 150% of the expected time to completion. We kind of talked a little bit about that, and when we talked about maximum time frame, that's defined in our regulations. Potential data source: institutions currently report graduation rates to IPEDS, and the department produces completion rates of Title IV recipients through the college scorecard, and institutions could calculate and report graduation rates specific to prison education programs, and institutions would need to identify which students are enrolled in prison education programs so that Ed can calculate the rate if produced similarly to the college scorecard. And a potential cohort would be the department could align reporting requirements with IPEDS or scorecard calculations, and we could exclude students who are involuntary transferred across facilities with additional reporting requirements. I think that would, so I'll stop there and open it up for conversation.
Stan.
So to my comment before on the 2-year period, this is one of those metrics that even more clearly shows that 2 years is too short. What type of completion rate data could you have in 2 years? I mean, it's, would be challenging to get that type of data in 2 years. The other point that I wanted to bring back is, so any program could come in and start a prison education program as long as the DLC, who's the gatekeeper, who according to legislation has been decided to be the gatekeeper, and it's not until 2 years that we would find out if they're a bad actor, according to how it's written, right? And then potentially remove them because they're not meeting some metric. But if I'm understanding correctly, any program could come in and at least be there for 2 years, despite being a potential bad actor, as long as the DLC, the gatekeepers, had let them in. Is that correct?
Aaron, would you like to respond?
I'm sorry, Kim, I just wanted to respond to Stanley's question really quickly. Thank you. So there are other program eligibility requirements that are already that were in statute that we replicated in regulation. And so if the program had any negative actions against it within if the institution had any negative actions in the last 5 years, from the department's perspective, emergency actions, suspensions, terminations, from the accreditor perspective, adverse actions or initiated adverse actions, that we've added to the regulation from the state's perspective. If there's any revocation of state authorization in the last 5 years, the programs would not be able to operate. So, and then also that we've put into the regulation that that even under the initial 2-year period, the institution would still be required to provide us with information on how the Bureau of Prisons determined the programs are operating in the best interest of students. So we would still have the information reported to us as well. We have authority, the department has authority to revoke approval if the institution violated any parts of the definition of a prison education program. So within that initial 2-year period, there are protections built in to hope to deter bad actors or to not allow in bad actors. However, if you have any suggestions on language, I think that was one of the comment bubbles. I think it was one of the comment bubbles we had in the document. Within that initial 2 years, I asked the committee, the subcommittee, I apologize, the subcommittee, I asked the subcommittee members, were there any additional restrictions that we should put, that we should tie into that initial 2-year period? Perhaps we put a cap on the number of additional locations that the institution can expand to in the first 2 years. Perhaps we put a cap on enrollment, or perhaps we say instead of, for example, instead of in the initial 2 years, the institution is only able to provide a prison education program at one additional location. Or for the first 2 years, for example, the institution has to apply to the department and the accreditor for every single prison education program that they want to provide at an additional location. Or perhaps, for another example, could be during the first 2 years, the institution that wants to offer the prison education program would have to submit the application for the first prison education program at each additional location. I think that's where I was trying to get feedback from the committee, whether there should be additional parameters around that first 2 years to ensure those protections.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay, Kim.
Thank you, Aaron, for all of that. I know that there's a lot that can be done. When I'm saying all this, it's actually coming back to institutions that I'm putting this back on. So hopefully they all agree with me. But for the betterment of the program, I think there's ways that the department could retrieve data from us. I mean, they're still going to have satisfactory academic progress in place. That kind of data could show how students are progressing. It may not always be the institution or the the academic aspect of it. It could be the student as well. But I think it would be a good metric to look at to make sure students are completing satisfactorily, amongst all of their programs. We're talking about 2 years also in completion rate 150%. Not all of these students are going to be allowed to take full-time enrollment. So we're talking about a longer expansion to complete a degree or certificate, 2-year, 4-year, whichever one it is. So maybe there's aspects put into, metrics put in depending on the type of program they're in as to when things are reported out. That helps institutions know how they're doing and to reassess if they're being productive or not. It also allows DOC to say, hey, they're not really providing us good instruction. We're not seeing good outcomes from our students. Maybe we need to make a change or talk to the institution about that. I think there's a lot of things we could put into place there through additional, through colleague letter language, just as ways to move forward. But I don't know that 2 years is going to actually do it. It'll give us a good idea, but with the 150%, that's a normal view of a full-time student at an institution. It's going to take a little longer, I think, in this population, depending on what the DOC allows their students to take. Thank you.
Marissa?
Well, good morning, everyone. I think for me, this is a big one. This is all big, but 2 years in a correctional facility is much different than in the university system. We all know that. But we really need to look at this unique environment with that 2-year limit. I think there need to be consistent, like you said, Erin, consistent benchmarks and parameters and things like that. But I don't really agree with the 2 years. That I think there needs to be some discussion on that 2-year window. So thank you for bringing up the caps and the parameters. I think that's so important. The other thing is not to go back to this, but I think the definition of recidivism is going to be huge, because that is the first thing people go to in front of, everyone always asks, what's your recidivism rate? What's that? So I think I agree with Dr. McTeer. We have to look at that. So thank you.
Belinda.
Thank you. Just a couple of comments. So number one, to get back to your what you were saying about completion rates, I think that is a very important metric. I talked yesterday about how certain things, when people are looking at a traditional university setting and certain, what your employment might look like after high school, what it might be with an associate's or things like that, those are standard practices that we see in traditional educational settings, and the completion rates is equally as important. We know that completion rates in a carceral space are likely going to look quite different from a quote unquote traditional campus or a main campus, and that's okay. I think that as we're moving into this space en masse, as a post July 2023, that this gives us a really good opportunity to kind of check and see. We've got a lot of our colleague in corrections just mentioned about corrections setting for 2 years and traditional education setting being quite different. A lot of current educational programs who are in prisons like to run a traditional kind of, fall semester, spring semester, a summer semester, and that's it. Is that very fair to have that like 3 sessions or 4 sessions fair to people who are currently incarcerated? A lot of students would say, look, don't give me that huge break over the summer or whatever. Give me as many classes as possible. So, I think this is a really good opportunity for educational entities, students, and others to kind of look at how this works. And completion rates will be one good way for us to kind of evaluate things. Second point, I just wanted to say, with regards to the 2-year, I understand my colleagues' concerns about certain things. If I'm understanding what Ed is saying here, it's my understanding that things like recidivism, for example, if we do the 5 to 7 year runway, or completion rates, if we're looking at students starting and it might take taken 4 years, 6 years to complete their degree. It's my certification. It's my understanding that this 2-year level wouldn't count against these institutions because Ed knows that this data would be coming sometime later. So if I'm hearing that correctly and I'm understanding it correctly, I still personally like the idea of the 2 years, because honestly, as someone who started a program myself and has looked at other programs, both Second Chance Pell and non-Second Chance
30
Pell,
seconds.
there's a lot of different ways that you can see whether or not a program is serving students' best interests within that 2 years. And if we extend beyond that 2 years, just think about that Pell clock ticking for students. So I still like the 2 years. Thank you very much.
Dave.
Mine is very quick, but I wanted to follow up on the suggestion that Kim made a few minutes ago regarding the use of satisfactory academic progress. I don't want to speak to that particular suggestion, but I will say that FSA, in response to the statutory requirements for the reporting that we'll have to do, FSA is working on developing a process for collecting credits earned and credits attempted by incarcerated individuals. So if the subcommittee thinks that that might be a useful metric to look at, I think there may be feasibility for the department to collect and calculate something along those lines as well. I'll stop there.
Marissa.
So I just want to say again, the completion rates over a 2-year period in a correctional facility, even our very high level students cannot take a lot of classes all at once. It's a very unique environment. They have jobs, they have other programming, they are, working to get back out into the community, working with their case managers and things like that. So I just wanted to bring that up again to make sure that that's on the record. Thank you.
Stan.
Yes, thank you. I want to agree with Belinda that 2 years is a critical point, but maybe as a checkpoint, as I had suggested earlier. And I also wanted to just ask if recidivism tracking is in the statute, thus, it's required. One, is there funding to do that? And two, if it's required, I think maybe adding regulatory language that clarifies that this is not being gathered or, we're not getting this data to assess whether the program is working or not, or quality or not. It is just data that is being gathered outside of the quality of the program. It would be a suggestion that we add language if it is something that we're requiring. And that touches on what Dr. McTeer says about the use. I mean, it's not a useful metric to say that a program is particularly quality or not, because there's so many other factors that may play into a person recidivating, that, Dr. McTeer's program may be awesome. It may be the best one in the country, but that, then you are looking at these types of metrics that aren't showing that. So maybe my suggestion is that even if we're tracking it, it's not being used to say that this program is quality or not.
I see no other hands.
That concluded our discussion. Thank you, Stan, and everyone else who provided ideas. That concluded our discussion on the outputs piece. After lunch, we will look at the inputs that would be the teacher experience, credentialing, and turnover, the transferability of credit, and the academic counseling and support services. And keep in mind the department wants to ensure that the prison education programs are offering similar services or providing a similar level of offerings to those that are in prison education programs to those that are in other eligible programs at the institution. So that's what the conversation will center around for after lunch.
I believe Kim has a hand up.
Thank you, Erin. I'll just it's really just a statement before we break. This is for Department of Ed to think about over our break and come back to give them an opportunity to think about it. The issue paper really, again, does not address the FAFSA process itself and the barriers that might be there for incarcerated individuals. But part of the completion rate might be inhibited by being able to complete that process each year. Especially for dependent students who are incarcerated, there are, as we talked about the other day, you're looking at verification, you're looking at different components of the process for this group. But I encourage Ed to look at, would we do dependency overrides for these individuals? Would that be a necessity? We don't always have the ability to help dependent students reach out to families that may not be willing to help them. And then what do? They're kind of stuck in the process. So I encourage you to look at that and then maybe address that when we come back. Thank you.
Will do. Thank you so much, Kim. So we will reconvene at 1 p.m. Thank you, everybody.